47 years old. I've spent 22 years as a search and rescue coordinator in the Pacific Northwest. I've recovered bodies from ravines. I found lost hikers 3 days gone, hypothermic and delirious. I've notified parents that we were transitioning from rescue to recovery. I know what 9 days in the wilderness does to a human body, especially a child's body. July 2019. 3 children disappeared from a campsite in Olympic National Forest, ages 6, 8, and 10. They were found on day 9, 14 miles from where they vanished. They were clean, well-fed, hydrated, their core temperatures normal, no signs of exposure, malnutrition, or psychological trauma. They told investigators a creature carried them there, a massive, hair-covered figure that walked on 2 legs. It fed them berries and fish, kept them warm, protected them. Inside the cave where rescuers found them, we documented bedding made from moss, a food stockpile, fresh water collection systems, and footprints, 18 inches long, pressed deep into the sediment floor. The stride pattern and weight distribution didn't match any cataloged animal. On the cave wall, someone had drawn a map, charcoal and berry juice, 3 small figures, 1 large figure, and the path back to human territory. Our thermal cameras captured something else, a bipedal heat signature standing across the valley during the rescue, 8 feet tall. It watched for 11 minutes as we extracted the children. Then it turned and walked into the forest with a gait our analysts couldn't explain. The official report calls it luck and childhood imagination. I was there. I saw the evidence. I watched the thermal footage 40 times. This is what actually happened in those 9 days. Olympic National Forest covers 628,000 acres of the Olympic Peninsula in Washington state. It's not wilderness in the way most people understand the term. It's a temperate rainforest, one of the last remaining old-growth ecosystems in the contiguous United States. The trees are giants. Douglas fir and Sitka spruce raising 200 feet, their canopies so dense that satellites can't penetrate to the forest floor. The understory is suffocating. Ferns, moss, devil's club with thorns that cause infections. The terrain drops into ravines without warning. Rivers run fast and cold, fed by glacial melt. Sound doesn't carry the way it should. The vegetation absorbs it. You can stand 50 feet from someone and hear nothing when they shout. The Henderson family arrived on July 12, 2019. Father, mother, 3 children. They set up camp at Graves Creek Campground, a developed site with picnic tables and fire rings. Not backcountry. The kind of place families visit every summer without incident. The children were playing near the campsite at approximately 3:47 p.m. The parents were 30 yards away, setting up a cooking area. The Forest Service report states the parents looked away for less than 3 minutes. When they looked back, all 3 children were gone. The initial search radius was small. Standard protocol for lost children assumes they don't travel far. Research shows young children, when lost, typically hide. They find a sheltered spot, under a log, in thick brush, and stay there. They're often too frightened to respond even when searchers call their names. They hunker down and wait. The Henderson children were found 14 miles from the campsite. That distance eliminates every standard explanation. A 6-year-old can't navigate 14 miles of this terrain. The 8-year-old had asthma. The 10-year-old was wearing sneakers, not hiking boots. The route from campsite to cave crosses 3 ridges, 2 river valleys, and sections of slopes so steep that our SAR teams needed ropes. The first responders arrived at 4:32 p.m. 45 minutes after the 911 call. They established a base camp and began grid searches radiating out from the last known location. By nightfall, they had 40 personnel deployed. K-9 units arrived at dawn the next day. The scent trail vanished 200 yards from the campsite, just stopped. The dog circled, searching for a direction, and found nothing. Rain that night washed away what little trace remained. Olympic National Forest sits at the center of Sasquatch country. The coastal tribes, Quinault, Quileute, Ho, have stories that go back centuries. They call it Tiatko, or Seyatik, the giant of the woods. In their accounts, it's not a monster. It's a guardian, a forest spirit that watches over lost children and punishes those who disrespect the land. The BFRO, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, lists over 200 reported sightings in the Olympic Peninsula region alone. Footprints, vocalizations, encounters. The Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife receives reports regularly enough that they have a standard response template. The forest has other disappearances on record, people who walked into the trees and were never seen again. In 2011, an experienced hunter vanished during elk season. His truck was found at a trailhead, his rifle still in the cab. No trace of him was ever recovered. In 2015, a geology student disappeared while collecting samples near Lake Quinault. Search teams found her backpack 3 miles from where she was last seen, carefully placed on a stump, contents undisturbed. The National Park Service doesn't keep centralized records of missing persons cases. There's no federal database. But researchers who've compiled unofficial lists note that Olympic National Forest appears with unusual frequency. The pattern isn't clear enough to prove anything, just frequent enough to notice. The Henderson search entered day 2 with expanded radius and additional resources. The Snohomish County helicopter joined. Volunteers from surrounding counties arrived. The initial optimism that the children had simply wandered and would be found quickly began to erode. By day 3, the incident commander briefed the parents on survival probabilities. Children can survive without food for weeks, but water becomes critical within 72 hours. Temperatures at night were dropping to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The forest was wet from recent rain. Hypothermia was the primary concern. The terrain made systematic searching nearly impossible. Grid patterns work in open areas. Here, you could walk past someone lying 10 feet away and never see them through the undergrowth. Thermal imaging from helicopters was tried. The canopy blocked it. Even at midday, the forest floor remains in shadow. On day 4, the search area expanded to a 5-mile radius. Standard protocol. It represented over 78 square miles of some of the most difficult terrain in the continental United States. The probability models showed diminishing returns. If the children had traveled beyond that radius, the chances of random search teams finding them approached 0. The parents were told to prepare for the worst. The first 48 hours of a wilderness search are called the golden hours. Statistics from the International Search and Rescue Incident Database show that 90% of lost children found alive are located within that window. After 48 hours, the survival rate drops sharply. After 72 hours, searches transition from rescue to recovery in all but exceptional circumstances. The Henderson children were missing for 216 hours. The search operation became one of the largest in Washington state history. By day 5, over 300 personnel were deployed. County Sheriff's Office, National Park Service Rangers, volunteer SAR teams from the Washington State SAR Planning Unit, Explorer Search and Rescue, Olympic Mountain Rescue. The Coast Guard provided helicopter support. The Civil Air Patrol flew grid patterns. They were searching for bodies. Nobody said it directly to the family, but the operational focus shifted. Searchers began checking areas where remains might settle, ravines, riverbanks, places where a small body might come to rest. The K-9 units switched from air scent dogs to cadaver dogs. The medical realities were straightforward. 3 days without water causes severe dehydration in children. Symptoms include confusion, lethargy, loss of consciousness. The children were last seen at 3:47 p.m. on a warm afternoon. By day 3, their bodies would be shutting down. Hypothermia was the other threat. Olympic National Forest maintains high humidity, even in summer. Nights drop to the mid-40s. Wet clothing accelerates heat loss. A child's body has less mass to retain warmth. The survival threshold, the point at which core temperature drops below 95 degrees and organ function becomes compromised, can be reached in hours. The children were found wearing the same clothing they disappeared in: cotton t-shirts, shorts, sneakers, no jackets, no rain gear. Standard lost child behavior made the 14-mile distance impossible to explain. Research from Dr. Robert Koster's Lost Person Behavior Study, the authoritative text used by SR teams worldwide, shows that children aged 6 to 12 travel a median distance of 0.8 miles from their last known position. 95% are found within 2.5 miles. 14 miles is 6 times the statistical outer boundary. The terrain between Graves Creek Campground and the cave system where the children were eventually found includes 3 significant ridge crossings. The elevation gain and loss total over 3,000 feet. There are 2 river crossings, the Graves Creek tributary and the upper Quinault River, both running high from snowmelt. The route crosses sections of slope between 35 and 40 degrees, steep enough that adult hikers use trekking poles. SAR coordinators plotted every possible path a child might take. None of them made sense. The most direct route required navigating terrain that trained adults find challenging. The children had no map, no compass, no survival training. The 6-year-old had never been hiking before this trip. Day 6 brought deteriorating weather. Rain moved in from the coast. Temperatures dropped. The search continued, but the operational tempo slowed. Helicopter flights were grounded. Ground teams pushed into more remote sectors, expanding the search radius to 7 miles. The incident commander held a private meeting with the family. The conversation was documented in the case file. He explained that active searching would continue for another 72 hours, then transition to limited operations. He used phrases like realistic expectations and providing closure. The Hendersons refused to leave base camp. Day 7, Day 8. Personnel began rotating out. Volunteers who'd taken time off work needed to return. The initial surge of resources, standard for the first week of a missing child case, was unsustainable. By day 8, the active search teams numbered fewer than 80. The probability maps were grim. Every hour that passed reduced the likelihood of a live recovery. The models account for variables: temperature, precipitation, available water sources, typical child behavior. By day 8, the statistical probability of finding all 3 children alive was functionally 0. The forest had swallowed them. Olympic National Forest is large enough to hide things indefinitely. There are sections where no trail exists, where perhaps no human has walked in decades. Old-growth forests don't have the clear sightlines of younger woods. The fallen logs are massive, 10 feet in diameter, covered in moss and ferns, creating barriers that force you to climb or detour. Ravines drop away suddenly, hidden by vegetation until you're at the edge. You could walk within 20 feet of someone and never know they were there. On the evening of day 8, the incident commander filed paperwork to transition the case to suspended status. Active searching would cease at the end of day 9. The case would remain open. If new information emerged, a hiker reporting something unusual, a UIGR hunter finding evidence, resources could be reactivated. The terminology changed. The children were now classified as missing persons, presumed deceased. Day 9 began with a small team, 12 searchers covering the farthest sections of the established grid. These were the remote areas, the low probability zones. One team, led by a ranger named Marcus Webb, pushed into the upper Knolt drainage. It wasn't part of the planned search area for that day. Webb later stated he had a feeling about the drainage, though he couldn't articulate why. At 11:47 a.m., Webb's team found footprints, small prints, child-sized, barefoot, fresh enough that the edges were still defined, not yet eroded by weather. The prints led into a ravine system that didn't appear on standard topographic maps. The call came through on the SAR radio at 11:47 a.m. on day 9. Team 7 had found something. Not bodies, not evidence of animal predation, not the scattered remains that everyone had privately begun expecting. Footprints, child-sized, fresh. The prints appeared on a game trail 14 miles northwest of the original campsite, a distance that made no sense. The lead searcher, a veteran with 23 years in mountain rescue, reported the tracks in a flat, careful voice. Small bare feet, 3 sets, leading downslope toward a ravine system that wasn't on any of their maps. The helicopter diverted immediately. By 1:15 p.m., Team 7 had followed the prints to a rock formation half hidden by old-growth cedar and thick sword fern. The entrance was narrow, less than 4 feet high, the kind of opening you'd walk past 100 times without seeing. Inside, the passage opened into a cave system, and inside the cave system they found the children, all 3, alive. The youngest saw the flashlight beams first. She stood up from what looked like a bed made of moss and said very clearly, "We knew you'd come." The SAR medic who reached them first would later describe the scene in his incident report with language that read more like confusion than relief. The children were clean. Their clothes were dirty, but their faces and hands had been washed. Their hair had been combed, crudely, but deliberately. They weren't huddled together for warmth. They weren't crying. They weren't displaying any of the psychological markers of trauma he'd been trained to recognize. They were calm. The 8-year-old, the boy, asked if they'd brought his parents. The 10-year-old girl asked if they could take some of the berries with them, because they were really good. The medic ran his assessment. Pulse normal, pupils reactive. No signs of dehydration. No visible injuries. Skin tone healthy. When he checked their oral mucosa, a quick test for dehydration, the tissue was moist and pink. 9 days in the wilderness. 3 children under the age of 11. No water filtration. No shelter except what they'd found. No adult supervision. They should have been dying. They looked like they'd been to summer camp. The medic asked the standard question. Had they been able to find water? The oldest girl nodded. She pointed deeper into the cave where the ceiling sloped down. He brought it to us. In leaves. Big ones. Like bowls. He. The medic noted the pronoun but didn't press. Not yet. Outside, the SAR coordinator was coordinating the extraction. The ravine was too narrow and too heavily forested for a helicopter landing. They'd have to hike the children out. 2 miles of steep terrain, back to the nearest clearing where the bird could set down. Inside, the medic asked if they'd been able to find food. The boy answered this time. He pointed to the corner of the cave where someone, or something, had arranged a stockpile. Salmon berries, thimbleberries, huckleberries, all cleaned, sorted by type. And next to the berries, a flat stone with remains of fish. Cooked fish. The bones were clean, picked over, but the smell of char was still faint in the air. The medic stared at the setup. Then he turned back to the children. "Who brought you the fish?" The youngest answered. "She was 6. She spoke with the kind of matter-of-fact simplicity that small children use when they're telling the truth. The big hairy man. The medic's hand stopped writing in his notebook. The man who helped us, the girl continued. He carried us here. He was really strong, and he made sure we were okay. The coordinator's voice crackled over the radio. They needed to move. Weather was changing. They had a window. But the medic didn't move yet. He looked at the other two children. Is that true? A man brought you here? Both nodded. The 10-year-old clarified. Not a man like you. Bigger. Way bigger. And he had hair everywhere. Like, all over. The medic wrote it down. Then he radioed for the others to come inside. Not for the extraction. For documentation. Because this wasn't a survival scene. This was something else. By the time Team 7 packed up to move, 4 other SAR personnel had entered the cave. They'd taken photographs. They'd cataloged the food stockpile. They'd noted the bedding, 3 separate nests of moss, each carefully shaped into a depression roughly the size of a child's body. And they'd found the footprints. Not at the entrance. Deeper inside, where the cave floor turned to soft dirt. Small prints from the children, barefoot, wandering in circles. And next to them, something larger, much larger. The prints were 18 inches long, humanoid in shape, 5 toes, a clear heel strike. The depth of the impression suggested significant weight, far more than any human. The stride length, measured between prints, was over 6 feet. One of the SAR volunteers, a forestry worker who'd spent 30 years in the Olympics, knelt next to the prints for a long time. Then he stood up and looked at the coordinator. You need to call someone, he said. Who? I don't know, but this isn't something we write up and file. The coordinator didn't respond. He was staring at the back wall of the cave. There were drawings there, made with charcoal and something darker. Later analysis would identify crushed berries as a pigment source. The images were crude, stick figures, 3 small ones, 1 large one, at least twice the size of the others, and between them, a series of lines that might have been a path, a route. Next to the drawings, at a height of roughly 4 feet, child eye level, someone had drawn a circle with lines radiating out from it. A sun. The medic asked the oldest girl if she'd made the drawings. She shook her head. He did. I think he was trying to show us the way out. But we couldn't understand it. And then you came. They carried the children out at 3:40 p.m. The helicopter lifted off 20 minutes later. By nightfall, the children were in a hospital in Port Angeles, undergoing full medical workups. Every test came back the same. Normal, healthy, well hydrated, well nourished. The attending physician noted in his report that the children showed no signs of starvation, exposure, or neglect. Their core body temperatures were normal. Their electrolyte levels were balanced. Their muscle tone was consistent with children who'd been active but not exhausted. He wrote one additional sentence at the bottom of his report. Condition: inconsistent with 9 days unsupervised in a wilderness environment. The hospital social worker assigned to assess the children for trauma conducted separate interviews. All 3 told the same story. The details matched. The timeline matched. The descriptions matched. A large, hair-covered figure, over 8 feet tall, non-threatening, protective. It had found them on the first day when they were crying and lost. It had picked them up, gently they emphasized, and carried them to the cave. It brought them food every day. It brought them water. At night, when the temperature dropped, it stayed near the entrance, blocking the wind. The youngest said it made sounds, not words, but soft sounds, like it was trying to calm them down. The boy said it was scary at first, but then it wasn't. The oldest said it left on the morning of the 9th day. Before dawn, she'd woken up and it was gone. She thought maybe it knew the rescuers were coming. The social worker documented everything. Then she wrote her own note. Children are not exhibiting signs of confabulation or coached testimony. Affect is consistent. No contradictions across interviews. Recommend psychiatric evaluation, but preliminary assessment suggests genuine belief in stated events. Back at the cave, a secondary team had arrived. They brought field equipment, cameras, measuring tools, evidence bags. They made plaster casts of the large footprints. They collected samples of the moss bedding. They photographed the drawings. They cataloged every berry, every fish bone, every item in the stockpile. And they found one more thing. Near the back of the cave, in a narrow alcove that the children likely hadn't explored, there was a pile of larger bones. Deer mostly. Elk. The bones were old, picked clean, stacked deliberately. This wasn't a random shelter. This was a place that had been used before, perhaps many times. The evidence bags were sealed. The documentation was filed. The official report, released 3 days later, stated that the children had been located in a natural cave formation, that they had survived by foraging and drinking from a nearby stream, and that their psychological accounts of a hairy figure were likely a coping mechanism, a manifestation of fear and isolation translated into a protective imaginary presence. The report acknowledged the footprints but offered no explanation for their size or depth. It acknowledged the prepared bedding, but attributed it to the children's own efforts, despite the fact that none of them could explain how they'd gathered or arranged the moss. It did not mention the drawings. The children were released to their parents 4 days after the rescue. They were healthy, they were whole, and they never changed their story. The interviews began in the hospital. Standard protocol. 3 children, 3 separate rooms, 3 different interviewers, a forensic child psychologist, a sheriff's deputy trained in child testimony, a pediatric trauma counselor. The goal was simple: establish what happened, identify inconsistencies, determine whether the children had been influenced, coached, or were confabulating, a common response in high-stress situations where the brain fills gaps with false memories. The youngest went first. She sat in a chair too big for her, legs swinging, and drew pictures while she talked. The counselor asked her to describe what happened after she got separated from her parents. "We were following a deer," she said. "It was really pretty. It had spots." A fawn. That matched the parents' account. The children had wandered off, chasing a young deer near the campsite. And then we couldn't find the tent anymore, and we started crying, and then he came. The counselor asked who he was, the big hairy man. She said it the same way she might say the mailman or the neighbor. No hesitation, no fear in her voice. The counselor asked her to describe him. Really, really tall. Taller than my dad. Taller than anyone. And he had hair all over. Brown hair. Long. And his face was different. Like a person, but not a person. She drew while she talked. A stick figure. Enormous. Standing next to 3 smaller figures. Was he scary? She thought about this. At first, but then he picked me up and I wasn't scared anymore. He was warm, and he smelled like the forest, like trees and dirt. Where did he take you? To the cave. He carried all of us. My brother and my sister too. He was really strong. Did he hurt you? No, he was nice. The counselor noted the word, nice. What did he do in the cave? He brought us food, berries. We were really hungry, and fish. He cooked the fish on a fire outside and brought it in. And he brought water in big leaves. They were like cups. Did he talk to you? No, but he made sounds, like humming, not words. but I think he was saying it's okay. Did you see him every day? She nodded. He came in the morning and at night. During the day, he was gone, but he always came back. Were you scared when he left? A little, but my sister said he'd come back, and he always did. The counselor asked her to draw the hairy man. She drew a large figure with long arms. She colored it brown. She added a circle for the face and 2 dots for eyes. Did he have a face like yours? Sort of, but flatter, and his eyes were lighter, not like people eyes. The session lasted 40 minutes. The counselor's notes described the child as calm, consistent, and credible. No signs of rehearsal, no signs of fabrication. The boy was interviewed next. He was 8. He sat very still and answered every question with precision. The deputy asked him to start from the beginning. We got lost. We didn't mean to. We were just walking and then we couldn't see the campsite anymore. We tried to go back, but everything looked the same. How long were you walking before you saw the person? Maybe an hour, maybe more. We were crying. My little sister was really scared. And then we heard something in the trees, something big. What did you think it was? I thought it was a bear, but then it stood up. The deputy stopped writing. It was behind a tree, and then it stepped out, and it was standing on 2 legs, like a person, but it was huge. How tall? The boy looked at the ceiling, estimating. Maybe 8 feet, maybe more. My dad is 6 feet, and this was way taller. What did it look like? It had hair everywhere, dark brown, long. Its arms were really long. Its hands were big, like this. He held his hands apart, demonstrating a width of nearly 12 inches. And its face was flat, not like a gorilla, flatter. What did it do? It looked at us for a long time, and then it came closer, really slow, like it didn't want to scare us. My sister was screaming, but it just knelt down in front of us, and it reached out, and it picked her up. How did it pick her up? With both hands, under her arms, really gentle. And then it picked up my other sister, and then me. It carried all 3 of us. At the same time? Yeah, it was really strong. The deputy asked where it took them. To the cave. It was far. I don't know how far, but it walked for a long time. It didn't run, just walked. And it was careful. It didn't drop us. It held us the whole time. What happened when you got to the cave? It put us down, inside, on the moss. It was soft, like a bed. And then it left. And we thought maybe it was gone. But it came back, with berries, a lot of berries, in its hands, and it gave them to us. Did it eat any? No, it just watched us eat. The deputy asked if the creature ever tried to communicate. Not with words, but it made sounds. Deep sounds. Like, I don't know, like a hum, or a growl but not angry. And it pointed. At the food, at the water, like it was showing us. Did it ever hurt you or your sisters? No, never. Did it touch you? Only to carry us. And one time my sister fell and it picked her up. But that's it. Were you scared? The boy paused. Yeah, at first. But then, I don't know. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt like it was helping us. The session lasted an hour. The deputy's report noted, child's account is detailed, consistent, and delivered without embellishment. No indicators of deception. The oldest girl was interviewed last. She was 10. She sat with her arms crossed and answered every question with the kind of blunt clarity that made the UB psychologist's job easier. We got lost. A man, or something like a man, found us and took us to a cave. He brought us food and water. He kept us safe. That's what happened. The psychologist asked her to describe the figure. Tall, maybe 8 or 9 feet, covered in hair. Brown, kind of reddish in the sun. Its face was human but not human, flat, big eyes, no expression. Or maybe I just couldn't read it. Did it speak? No, but it made sounds. Low sounds. I think it was trying to talk to us. Or calm us down. I don't know. Were you afraid? Yes. At first. But it didn't act like it wanted to hurt us. It acted like it wanted to help. How did you know that? Because it brought us food. It brought us water. It could have left us there. It could have hurt us. It didn't. The psychologist asked about the drawings on the cave wall. It made those. On the second or third day, I watched it. I used a stick with charcoal on the end, and it drew us, and it drew itself, and it drew lines. I think it was trying to show us the way out, but we couldn't understand. Did it try to teach you? Maybe. It pointed at the drawing. It pointed outside, but we were too scared to leave. We thought we'd get more lost. When did it leave? The last morning, before the sun came up. I was awake. I heard it move. It stood at the entrance for a while, just looking outside, and then it left. I didn't see it again. Do you think it knew the rescuers were coming? She nodded. Yeah, I think it did. The psychologist asked her what she thought the figure was. The girl looked at her for a long time. I don't know, but it wasn't a person, and it wasn't an animal. It was something else. The psychologist's final report was 3 pages long. The conclusion was 2 sentences. All 3 children provide consistent, detailed accounts of an encounter with a large bipedal figure. No evidence of coaching, fabrication, or trauma-induced confabulation. The parents were interviewed separately. They confirmed the children had no prior exposure to Bigfoot media. No books, no movies, no conversations about cryptids or Sasquatch. The family didn't watch paranormal television. The children's school curriculum didn't cover folklore or wilderness legends. The father, when asked if he believed his children, said, "I believe they believe it, and I can't explain how they survived, so I don't know what else to think." The mother said, "Something kept them alive. I don't care what it was. I'm just grateful." The official position, released by the sheriff's office 2 weeks later, was carefully worded. The children's accounts are noted. Physical evidence recovered from the scene remains under analysis. No definitive explanation for the survival of the children has been determined. But inside the evidence room, the plaster casts of the 18-inch footprints sat in sealed bags. And inside the cave, the drawings remained on the wall. 3 small figures, 1 large figure, and a path leading home. The cave entrance measured 4 feet high, 2 feet wide, narrow enough that the lead SAR technician had to remove his pack and squeeze through sideways, headlamp cutting into absolute darkness. He expected a shallow depression, a rock overhang where 3 traumatized children had huddled for warmth. What he found stopped him mid-crawl. The passage opened into a chamber roughly 12 feet across, 8 feet high at the center. Not a natural shelter stumbled upon by accident. A deliberately chosen space, modified for habitation. 3 distinct beds lined the far wall, not piles of gathered debris. Constructed nests, each one measured approximately 3 feet in diameter, woven from western hemlock moss, sword fern fronds, and Douglas fir boughs. The construction showed technique. Outer layers of coarser material for structure, inner layers of fine moss for insulation and comfort. The positioning was deliberate, arranged in a protective alcove where the cave wall curved, creating a windbreak and thermal pocket. Each nest had been shaped with a subtle depression in the center, conforming to a child's body. The lead technician radioed out, "You need to see this, all of you." Within 20 minutes, the cave held 6 rescue personnel, 2 forensic investigators, and 1 wildlife biologist from Olympic National Park. They worked in silence, photographing every surface, measuring every detail. The food cache sat against the east wall, organized in a way that made the biologist's hands shake when he cataloged it. Fresh salmon berries, separated from thimbleberries, both separated from huckleberries. Each berry type placed on a broad skunk cabbage leaf. Nearby, 6 cleaned trout lay on a flat stone, gutted and descaled with precision. Edible fiddlehead ferns, still tender, bundled with what appeared to be wild ginger root. Nothing spoiled, nothing contaminated. The fish couldn't have been more than a day old. Someone had been provisioning this cave. Recently. Regularly. The water collection system defied the assumption that they were dealing with an animal. Large big-leaf maple leaves, each spanning nearly 2 feet across, had been positioned to funnel condensation from the cave ceiling into a natural depression in the stone floor. The depression held approximately 2 gallons of clean water. The leaves showed intentional placement, weighted at the edges with small stones to maintain the proper angle for drainage. This wasn't instinct. This was engineering. Then there were the footprints. The cave floor was primarily stone, but patches of fine sediment had accumulated near the entrance and along the north wall where groundwater seeped through cracks. The children's prints were everywhere, small sneaker treads, bare feet, the chaotic pattern of kids moving around a confined space for days. Mixed among them were the others. The first clear print measured 18 inches from heel to toe, 7 inches across at the ball. The second print, 3 feet ahead in a natural stride, matched exactly. Then another, and another. A trail leading from the entrance to the food cache, from the food cache to the beds, from the beds back to the entrance. The forensic team photographed them from every angle, then made plaster casts of the 3 clearest impressions. The casts showed details that eliminated every conventional explanation. Dermal ridges, the primate equivalent of the fingerprints, covered the surface. The ridge patterns were consistent with a primate, not a bear or any other animal. The depth of the impressions suggested a weight exceeding 400 pounds, distributed across a foot structure that was flat and flexible, designed for bipedal locomotion. The toe spread indicated a creature that walked barefoot constantly, with toes adapted for gripping uneven terrain. 5 distinct toes. The big toe not opposable like a great ape's, but aligned forward like a human's, built for walking, not climbing. One of the forensic investigators, a woman with 20 years in the King County Sheriff's Office, knelt beside the clearest print for 11 minutes. She didn't speak. When she finally stood, she looked at her partner and shook her head once. No explanation. No theory. Just the evidence. The cave extended deeper than the initial chamber. A narrow passage at the rear led to a smaller room, no more than 6 feet across. This one held no beds, no food, just stone walls, worn smooth by water over centuries, and one feature that would dominate every subsequent investigation. The drawings covered a section of the east wall, roughly 4 feet above the cave floor, positioned at the exact height where a child standing upright would see them clearly. Crude figures rendered in charcoal and what appeared to be crushed berry pigment. 3 small stick figures, holding hands. One massive figure beside them, easily twice their height. Simple lines, but proportionally accurate. The large figure's arms extended downward toward the smaller ones in a gesture that read unmistakably as protective. Beside the figures, a series of marks that took longer to interpret. Curved lines, angular intersections, dots clustered in patterns. The SAR team thought it was abstract decoration until the wildlife biologist tilted his head and saw it. A map. The curved lines matched the topography of the ravine system. The angular intersections corresponded to ridge lines. The cluster of dots aligned with the approximate location of the original campsite, 14 miles northwest. A single line connected the cave position to the campsite position, with smaller marks along the route that could represent landmarks: a fallen log, a distinctive boulder, a stream crossing. The drawings weren't decoration, they were instruction. Someone had created a visual guide designed for 3 children who couldn't read a compass or topographic map, showing them the road home. The anthropologist arrived on day 10, a professor from the University of Washington specializing in primitive art and symbolic communication. She spent 4 hours in that back chamber, examining the drawings with a hand lens, taking mineral samples from the pigments, measuring the height and positioning. Her preliminary report, filed with the sheriff's office and later leaked to media, contained 3 conclusions. First, the charcoal marks were made with a tool, a stick or piece of charred wood, held in a grip consistent with a primate hand, not a paw or hoof. The pressure applied was controlled, deliberate, showing fine motor skills. Second, the berry pigment was huckleberry, crushed and applied with what appeared to be fingertip pressure. The smudge patterns showed dermal ridges, consistent with the footprint casts. Third, the drawings demonstrated spatial reasoning, symbolic thinking, and an intent to communicate abstract information. The map showed understanding of landscape from an elevated perspective, the ability to translate 3-dimensional terrain into 2-dimensional representation, and the cognitive leap required to understand that symbols on a wall could convey navigational information. These were not animal markings. They were evidence of a mind capable of abstract thought, symbolic representation, and empathetic communication. The professor's final line, buried in paragraph 12 of her report, the cognitive abilities required to produce these images place the creator firmly within the range of hominid intelligence, comparable to early Homo sapiens or late Homo erectus. The cave yielded one more piece of evidence, discovered on day 11 when investigators returned with portable lighting to document the site more thoroughly. Hair samples, thick dark brown to reddish-brown strands caught on a rough projection of stone near the beds. The individual hairs measured 4 to 6 inches long, coarse in texture, with a diameter exceeding human hair by approximately 40%. DNA testing would later prove inconclusive. Degraded samples, contamination, results that didn't match any known species in the database, but showed primate markers that couldn't be definitively classified. The investigators sealed the cave on day 12, stringing caution tape across the entrance and posting a Forest Service notice, declaring it off-limits pending further study. The official reason cited ongoing investigation and public safety concerns. Within a month, the cave was empty again. The moss beds had been removed for lab analysis. The food cache had been photographed, cataloged, and cleared. The drawings had been measured, sampled, and replicated via high-resolution photography and hand tracing. All that remained were the footprints in stone, too deep in the rock floor to remove without destroying them, and the faint smell of wood smoke and something else. Something wild and unfamiliar that lingered in the back chamber where the drawings waited in darkness. The children had lived in that space for 9 days, fed, watered, protected and educated by something that left 18-inch tracks and drew maps at child height so they could find their way home. The evidence didn't suggest animal behavior. It documented intelligence, empathy, and communication. Whatever built that sanctuary understood fear, comfort, and the concept of return. It knew the children didn't belong in the forest. It knew they needed guidance to get back, and it knew how to give it. Dr. Sarah Vance made the 4-hour drive from Seattle to the Olympic Peninsula on October 22nd, 3 days after the cave discovery. She specialized in symbolic cognition and primitive art systems, with fieldwork spanning indigenous Australian rock art, Paleolithic European cave paintings, and early hominid tool markings from East Africa. The sheriff's office call hadn't provided details. Just a request. Analyze drawings found at a cave. Site. Determine origin and intent. She expected vandalism. Teenage boredom rendered in spray paint. The first photograph changed that assumption in 5 seconds. The images had been taken with a macro lens under portable LED arrays, capturing the cave wall in sections that could be stitched into a composite. The resolution showed individual grain patterns in the stone, micro variations in pigment density. The three-dimensional relief where charcoal had been pressed into porous rock. Vance opened the file on her laptop in the sheriff's office conference room, and her coffee went cold while she stared. The figures were crude in execution, but sophisticated in conception. 3 small humanoid forms, each with a head, torso, 2 arms, 2 legs. Proportions were accurate. The heads measured roughly 1/7 of the total body height, consistent with child anatomy. They stood in a row, arms extended outward and touching, creating a linked chain. Beside them, the large figure, height approximately twice that of the smaller forms. Broad shoulders, long arms, thick legs. The head shape was distinct, a sagittal crest suggestion, indicating a pronounced ridge across the skull. The face showed 2 eyes, rendered as simple dots, positioned wide set. No nose detail, no mouth. But the arms were positioned downward and forward, hands open, in a posture Vance had seen before in her research. The protective gesture, found in Paleolithic art depicting adults with children, in indigenous rock paintings showing elders guiding youth, a cross-cultural symbol so fundamental it appeared independently across continents and millennia. I am watching over you. The charcoal tool marks told the next part of the story. Vance examined the high-resolution scans, measuring the width and pressure depth of each line. The strokes were confident, executed without hesitation or correction. No practice marks, no false starts. Whoever made these drawings had a clear mental image before beginning. The charcoal itself was Douglas fir, burned and aged between 5 and 15 days based on carbon degradation. It had been held in a power grip, thumb opposition, against fingers, the way a human holds a pencil or stick. The pressure applied varied with precision. Lighter strokes for the children's figures, heavier strokes for the outline of the large figure, creating a visual hierarchy that emphasized the protector. This wasn't random scratching, it was deliberate composition. The berry pigment added another layer. Crushed huckleberry had been applied to specific areas. The hands of the small figures where they connected, the open palms of the large figure, and several marks along the map lines. The application method appeared to be fingertip pressure, smudges rather than strokes, with ridge patterns visible in the dried pigment. Vance requested the original pigment samples, still in evidence, bags from the forensic team. She examined them under a comparison microscope, looking at the ridge patterns preserved in the berry stain. The ridges were consistent with primate dermal patterns. Whorl density, ridge width, and flow patterns all fell within the range of great ape fingerprints. But the ridge count per centimeter was lower than human, higher than gorilla. The pattern occupied an unexpected middle ground. She made a note. Fingerprints consistent with unknown primate species. Recommend comparison with plaster casts from cave floor. Then she turned to the map. The map occupied a space roughly 18 inches wide by 12 inches high, positioned directly to the right of the figures. It had been executed primarily in charcoal, with huckleberry dots marking specific locations. Vance overlaid a topographic map of the region on a transparent sheet, aligning it with the cave drawings using the distinctive U-shape of the ravine system as a reference point. The correlation was immediate. The curved lines matched ridge contours. The angular intersections corresponded to valleys where two waterways met. The spacing between major features aligned with the actual distances in the terrain, compressed and simplified, but proportionally accurate. 3 berry pigment dots marked the cave location. A cluster of 7 dots, positioned at the map's northwest corner, aligned with the campsite coordinates provided by the Park Service. A single charcoal line connected them, with smaller perpendicular marks at intervals along the route. Vance counted 11 marks. She checked the search and rescue reports. The route from cave to campsite crossed 11 major landmarks: a fallen cedar spanning a creek, a distinctive granite outcrop, a marshy meadow, a split-trunk hemlock, others documented in the SAR team's navigation logs. The map showed on all 11. Vance sat back and stared at the evidence board for 20 minutes without moving. To create this map required several cognitive capabilities. First, aerial perspective. The mapmaker had to visualize the landscape from above, mentally rotating their ground-level experience into a bird's-eye view. This is a complex spatial reasoning task that doesn't develop in human children until age 7 or 8 and requires abstract thinking. Second, symbolic representation. The mapmaker understood that lines on a surface could stand for real-world objects: ridges, valleys, trees. This is the foundational concept of symbolic thought, separating humans from most animal cognition. Third, scale compression. The actual distance was 14 miles. The map was 18 inches. The mapmaker had to proportionally reduce the terrain while maintaining accurate relationships between features. This requires mathematical reasoning, even if unconscious. Fourth, communicative intent. The map wasn't for the creator. It was for the children. The mapmaker had to understand that the children didn't know the route, that they needed guidance, and that visual symbols could convey navigational information to someone else. This is theory of mind, understanding that another consciousness has different knowledge than you do. These 4 capabilities together represented a level of cognitive sophistication that Vance had only seen in one species, Homo sapiens. Except the fingerprints weren't human, the footprints weren't human, and no human had been in that cave except 3 children who couldn't have created these drawings. Vance reviewed the children's testimony, provided by the sheriff's office with parental consent. All 3 described watching the large figure draw on the cave wall. 8-year-old Marcus said the creature used a black stick and smooshed berries with his thumb. 10-year-old Kelsey said it pointed at the drawings, then pointed toward the cave entrance, repeating the gesture until she understood. This shows you the way out. 6-year-old Emma said the hairy man made a picture so we could go home. The height of the drawings supported this. Vance measured from the cave floor to the center of the map, 42 inches. The average eye level for children aged 6 to 10, 38 to 46 inches. The drawings had been positioned for a child standing upright to see them clearly. Not at adult height, not at the height of someone crouching. At child height. This was intentional design for a specific audience. Vance compiled her analysis into a 14-page report submitted to the sheriff's office on October 29th. Her conclusions were careful, hedged with scientific caution, but unambiguous. The cave wall markings demonstrate symbolic thinking, spatial reasoning, and communicative intent. The creator possessed cognitive abilities, including aerial perspective visualization, proportional scaling, and theory of mind. These capabilities are diagnostic of hominid-level intelligence. The positioning, content, and execution of the drawings indicate they were created specifically to communicate navigational information to the 3 children. This represents not just intelligence, but empathy and cross-species communication. The physical evidence, tool marks, fingerprints, hair samples, and footprints, is inconsistent with any known human presence at the site. If the children's testimony is accurate, these drawings represent cognitive and communicative behavior by an unidentified primate species. Her final paragraph, added after debate with herself that lasted 3 days. In 30 years of studying symbolic cognition across human cultures and evolutionary history, I have never encountered evidence of this clarity, suggesting intelligence in a non-human, non-extinct species. If these drawings are genuine and the context is as reported, they represent one of the most significant anthropological discoveries in modern history. They suggest we share North American wilderness with a relict hominid population capable of abstract thought, symbolic communication, and empathetic behavior toward human children. This conclusion will be controversial. The evidence, however, is clear. The report was filed, classified, and removed from public access within 48 hours. When Vance requested permission to publish her findings in an academic journal, she received a formal letter from the National Park Service, the U.S. Forest Service, and the FBI's Joint Task Force on the case. Publication was denied pending ongoing investigation and national security review. The drawings remained in the cave, photographed and documented, but otherwise untouched. The sheriff's office released a brief public statement acknowledging markings of unknown origin had been found at the site, but provided no images, no analysis, no details. Dr. Vance kept copies of everything: the photographs, the measurements, the ridge pattern analysis, her full report. She stored them in a safe deposit box in Seattle with instructions that they be released to the University of Washington archives. Upon her death, she never got permission to publish. But 6 months later, high-resolution images of the cave drawings appeared on a cryptozoology research website, uploaded anonymously from an untraceable IP address. The images went viral within 72 hours. The drawings showed the world what 3 children had seen in the darkness of a Pacific Northwest cave. Proof that something intelligent, something protective, something unknown had communicated with them in the only way it knew how, with pictures, at child height, showing them the way home. The children's story echoes something older than the Olympic National Forest itself. Coast Salish tribes have spoken for centuries about the Sayatko. Forest giants, wild people, not monsters, guardians. The oral traditions describe beings who watch over the deep woods, who occasionally guide lost travelers, who show particular care toward children separated from their families. The official reports don't mention this, but the cave evidence fits the pattern. Great apes build sleeping nests. Gorillas create elaborate bedding from moss and leaves, refreshing it daily. Orangutans demonstrate spatial reasoning and tool use. Bonobos show empathy, particularly toward juveniles. The food stockpile found in that cave required ecological expertise, knowing which berries won't poison, how to catch fish in forest streams, which roots are edible. Knowledge accumulated over generations. The Olympic Peninsula contains over 628,000 acres of old-growth forest. Vast sections remain unmapped. A small population of relic hominids, a surviving branch of the primate family tree, could theoretically persist undetected in that expanse. The Pacific Northwest provides everything required: dense cover, abundant food sources, water, minimal human intrusion. The footprints showed dermal ridges. Plaster casts revealed finger-like impressions in the moss bedding. The drawings demonstrated symbolic thinking. These details don't describe an animal. They describe something with cognitive capacity approaching human complexity. something that understood 3 terrified children needed food, warmth, and a path home. The forest has kept this secret for centuries. 9 days in September, it chose to reveal itself. The official explanation: remarkable luck. Search and rescue reports attributed the children's survival to favorable weather conditions and natural shelter. The big hairy man became a trauma-induced coping fantasy, something the children invented to make sense of their ordeal. The evidence tells a different story. Could it have been a bear? Black bears inhabit the Olympics, but bears are quadrupeds. The thermal footage showed bipedal locomotion. Bears don't weave moss into sleeping nests or organize food into separate piles. They don't make charcoal drawings. The 18-inch footprints with visible dermal ridges match no known bear anatomy. Shared hallucination? 3 children interviewed separately gave matching accounts. Same physical description, same behavioral details, same cave layout. Trauma doesn't create identical false memories across multiple witnesses. And hallucinations don't leave footprints. The hoax theory requires more suspension of disbelief than the creature itself. Someone would need to locate 3 lost children in 628,000 acres of forest, keep them alive and healthy for 9 days, prepare an elaborate cave system, create forensically convincing footprints with dermal ridges, then vanish without detection, while massive search operations surrounded the area. The timeline doesn't allow it. The logistics don't support it. Authorities redacted sections of the SAR reports. Details that didn't fit the conventional narrative simply disappeared from official records. But the thermal footage remained. The plaster casts remained. The drawings remained. The contradictions stack until the official explanation collapses under its own weight. The thermal imaging footage came from SIR Helicopter Flight 7, recorded at 14:23 hours on day 9. The pilot was repositioning for final extraction when the FLYAR operator flagged an anomaly, 400 yards across the valley, standing on an exposed ridge, a large bipedal heat signature, motionless. Facing directly toward the cave entrance, the operator locked the camera. The timestamp ran 11 minutes. The figure didn't move. Not a bear. Bears are quadrupeds. This stood upright. Stride analysis later confirmed bipedal locomotion, inconsistent with any catalogued animal. The heat distribution suggested mass exceeding 600 pounds. Height estimated at 8 feet minimum. It stood there while rescuers secured the children, while medics performed assessments, while radios crackled with confirmation codes. Then, at 14:34, the figure turned, 3 strides into the tree line. Gone. The gait was wrong for a human, wrong for a costume. The stride length measured nearly 6 feet. The movement fluid, purposeful, unhurried. Experts who reviewed the footage noted the behavior. The creature wasn't fleeing the helicopter. It was observing, waiting to confirm the children made it out. The official report classified the signature as unidentified wildlife. The footage was archived, the case closed, but the thermal image remains. A dark shape on a ridge watching over 3 children it had sheltered for 9 days, ensuring their safe return before disappearing into the forest that has hidden its kind for centuries. The evidence sits in boxes, plaster casts of 18-inch footprints, photographs of moss bedding arranged in the child-sized nests, thermal footage of something that shouldn't exist. 3 children, examined by physicians, showed no signs of malnutrition or exposure. Their accounts, given independently, matched in every detail. Authorities call it luck. Skeptics call it coincidence. The official position: the children survived through remarkable fortune. Their story, a trauma response. But the cave was real. The food cache was real. The thermal signature was real. Either this represents the most elaborate series of accidents in search and rescue history, or something walks the Olympic National Forest that science refuses to acknowledge. Something intelligent, something protective, something that watches from the shadows and intervenes when the vulnerable need help most. The creature on that ridge knew which explanation is true. Now you decide what you believe.